Hey everybody, I'm Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, July 8th, 2020. Now, you won't be able to see them, but swarming all around me are absolutely little teeny gnats. For some reason, I think it's just this sweltering summer heat here in South Carolina, but they are everywhere. Last night, my wife and I were walking down the street with our son and the little boo dog that we have, a little cockapoo, and we're walking down the street, and my wife starts yelling because gnats have gotten in her eyes, and so we had to stop and clean them out, and it was deeply, deeply frustrating, even painful. But it started me thinking about an important philosophical point that we need to attend to in our lives today. And that is, what are the invisible obstacles that make the enjoyment of your life, being able to move forward in your life, harder? What is it that stands in your way, that causes you to get distracted? But they might not be big things, right? It's easy to talk about the rock in your shoe that keeps you from being able to run fast. It's easy to talk about the mountain that you've got to get up in order to get to the plateau where you're headed. But what about all these minuscule, 1,000 little invisible things? What are those things for you? Well, what would it look like to be able to move out from the influence of those gnats, the influence of the invisible obstacles, and move forward into success, into faithfulness, into flourishing? This is hard work because one of the things in particular about these small invisible obstacles is that they tend to be all surrounding us, all consuming. Whereas the big obstacle, we can just navigate, we can turn the car, go around it. But these small ones, they almost get in us. The idea is you can't navigate the world correctly so long as these small obstacles continue to be in your space. So today, I think what we can do is draw on philosophical resources for responding to these invisible obstacles. Let me give you just two. The first is the idea that philosophy is not about certainty. It's about confidence despite continued questions. Now, why this matters is because I think the search for certainty can itself be one of these little invisible things we don't realize, we don't recognize, we don't take stock of, but it can prevent us from moving forward in productive ways. Let's be confident, but not think that certainty is an idol toward which we should bow. The second philosophical resource I want to mention is the idea that comes from a philosopher, contemporary philosopher named John Kaag. He wrote this book recently called Hiking with Nietzsche. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. It's almost a sort of personal autobiography written alongside a discussion of Nietzsche's life and work. In that book, it tells us that the task of existence is to become who we are. And why I think this is also one of these highlights, these resources for responding to invisible small obstacles, is we often think the task is to become some other thing, to try to transform ourselves. But it might be the case that what we need to do is actually become ever more rooted in the self that we already are and learn that self-trust, develop that voice, and then live into who it is we are in fact already. That idea, I think, is a resource for how we find ourselves in the world because Kaag and Nietzsche remind us that the goal is not just to climb to the top of the mountain. The goal is to continue moving forward in a direction that we think matters. So I hope these ideas are helpful. Let's find ways to avoid the gnats in our lives, those invisible obstacles that sometimes get all over us, all in us, and cause us to have to be distracted and end up being in despair rather than moving forward in productive lives of significance. I'll see you tomorrow, unless a piano falls on our heads.